a perfect score.
Awesome.
And if I don't get a perfect score, but I get something really close, I'll be thrilled. But I originally my goal was 167, then it was 172, and now I think why not just go for 179? Yeah, so
180, absolutely. Just say 180. Just say
180. All the way.
Okay, great. Awesome. So it's great that you're allowing so much time to master this. I mean, we're speaking now early October. You've got a solid 3 months plus till you take the January LSAT. So that's plenty of time to improve significantly.
Yeah. I am trying to put in 2 to 3 hours a day, and I'm trying to tuck memorization of terms and words into some downtime, like at stoplights or whatever. But I find that if I don't put in the time, it's not going to happen. And when I'm putting in the time, my natural instinct is to say, do more, accomplish more, accomplish more. And so I'm really having to slow myself down and say, think more, examine more, analyze more. And that is counterintuitive for me, but I am hoping that it ultimately pays dividends. So.
Sure. I mean, you can slow down if you just know what to slow down on, right? So if we're talking in the context of working on a weak area, of course, you have all the time in the world. You can drill questions on the side by type. You can do them under untimed conditions and take as long as you need, especially during the review after the fact, or if you're redoing a question. And in the context of a timed section, you know, based on the level of difficulty, let's say in logical reasoning, the harder questions are going to come later. So you can budget your time accordingly to allow more for the questions that truly need it.
Yeah. I am trying to work through the Socratic review process. And right now I'm really working on logical reasoning, especially this week, where yesterday and today, sufficient assumption questions. And they're tough for me. Anyway, I'm just trying to write down and write down why I got it wrong. It's just the things you've said, what made it attractive, why the right one is ultimately right. And sometimes I'm not sure, but I'm trying. And then I will go and read explanations online and then try to say it in my own words. I'm just hoping that this slow process really trains my brain.
Yeah, well, if anything, Will, this is it. I mean, the idea of slowing down and understanding why you got something wrong and what exactly tripped you up. I mean, I can't think of a better way to improve your understanding than to do just that. And the key is to, of course, focus your attention on the areas that most need it. So you've talked about logical reasoning, logic games. When you filled out the form, you talked about doing more versus going deeper. Can you share a bit more about that?
I'm addicted to logic games. I love to do them, but I need to go deeper. I need to spend some time writing my own logic game. And I started to do it, and it was really hard. But I am trying to get into the mindset of the LSAT writer. Anyway, I need to spend time writing a logic game, and I need to spend time looking at logical reasoning questions and transforming them into each of the different types so that I understand that better.
Yeah, that's definitely an examples of going deeper, right? To reverse engineer the exam, see what goes into making a difficult question or reframing a question. So I would definitely recommend doing both of those. And if logical reasoning needs more attention, then maybe spend 25% of this bonus analysis time on writing your own game and 75% of that extra time on reframing LR. And I say bonus time, meaning in addition to doing timed sections or reviewing fundamentals, the more classic stuff.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's see what my questions are for you. I have some very specific questions about specific problems, but that is probably not the thing for today.
But for the questions that you do have, the specific ones, I would encourage you that you ask them in class or you send me an email and I can have them added to the agenda for an upcoming class. That way you also get the benefit of the instructor maybe doing some preparation for it, and then also the insights from the other students in the group.
Yeah. One thing I'm working on right now is writing conditional statements from stimuli that don't contain obvious conditional indicators.
Yeah.
And not every stimulus contains those kinds of indicators, and not every stimulus is a conditional kind of a thing. But I'm working on that. And sometimes as I look at a sentence, I have to think really hard and figure out which is the sufficient and which is the necessary. Try to put, the sufficient in a smaller box and the necessary in a larger box. So that I'm working on that. And another thing that I'm working on is insufficient assumptions is trying to fill the gap. And sometimes I don't see where the gap is, but I often see it. And then it takes a lot of creativity to try to fill it so I can pre-phrase the answer. So I'm working on that. Parallel reasoning makes me a little bit crazy, especially when they have the 5 answer choices that are so very, very similar to each other, and they've just rewritten them all and changed 1 or 2 words. That makes my brain hurt, and I need to shore up my parallel reasoning skills.
I've got a couple of thoughts for you based on what you've shared. One of them is when you talk about identifying conditionals in stimuli that don't obviously contain them or don't contain indicators. Any argument, meaning we have evidence, we have a conclusion, that can be reframed. Excuse my dog barking in the background. That can be reframed as a conditional statement. So I was saying that any stimulus that contains an argument can be reframed as a conditional statement. You have evidence, you have conclusion. Even in the absence of any conditional indicators, we can say evidence, arrow, conclusion. So the evidence is the sufficient condition, the conclusion is the necessary condition. After all, they are saying that because we have this evidence, we can therefore justify this conclusion.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
And then this ties in with sufficient assumptions actually quite nicely, because some sufficient assumptions contain some big gap where that gap would actually be supplied as a new conditional statement in the answer choice. You see this in my workshops on sufficient assumption questions. Have you looked at those?
Yeah, that's
right. So I have the different types, right? I have the different categories of sufficient assumptions. And one of the most popular is one where we have the sufficient assumption actually being a new conditional statement. So that happens sometimes, but there are also, are you familiar with what I'm talking about? I sense a puzzled look for a moment, which is okay.
I'm just thinking through what you just said, and I'm taking notes. Sufficient assumptions can be a new conditional statement. And that actually might be one of my questions. Like, it seems like we are embedding a conditional in a conditional. So sometimes in some of the questions I've looked at, I thought, I'm just adding a conditional to this conditional, but it's not, I'm not describing it well.
No, it's okay. I know exactly what you mean. It's not that what we're doing is we're dealing with an argument that contains multiple conditional statements already. So if that's the case, here's one example. We have the evidence saying that D requires E. Mm-hmm. We have a conclusion saying D requires F. So we have 2 conditional statements in the stimulus already.
Yeah, right. I get that. I just went to another thought, and maybe this is related and maybe it's not. Sometimes it seems like the evidences don't connect. And so we have D requires F, E requires F, G requires F. F is our conclusion. And I don't know how to connect D, E, and F. No, D, E, and G. I don't know how to connect D, E, and G so that I can get to F. And so I'm working on that. That's one of my weaknesses in sufficient assumptions, is actually connecting all the evidences.
Yeah, well, these are among some of the most difficult logical reasoning questions of all. An example would be the wigs question, handmade wigs in prep test 58. If you want to look that one up at some point. Again, prep test 58 about wigs with handmade hair and stuff like that. That's a really complicated one, and probably the most extreme example I can think of, where we've got lots of conditionals and we're connecting them together. We're supplying a new conditional from the answer choice to fill in that gap. But the trickiest thing of all, in my view, is that some of the conditionals they give us end up being irrelevant, like they're just filler. They end up not being useful at all for forming that longer chain. So navigating these is a journey, and I have them all. I've not all, but I have a lot of these questions categorized. If you send me an email after the call, I'll have my team send you a document containing a bunch of sufficient assumption questions categorized by type. It may also be linked below some of these workshops. But anyway, the reason I brought up sufficient assumptions is because some are like this, where we have tons of conditionals. It can get messy, but we also have some sufficient assumption questions that contain no conditionals at all, where it's just evidence, conclusion, both as concrete statements, like they're independent clauses, just two separate independent clauses. And then the correct answer is simply linking them together as if they were a conditional. So here's an example. We could say that it's 1:45, therefore the sun is up.
Okay.
Those aren't really conditional indicators. We don't really have if then, but if we learned as new information that whenever it's 1:45, the sun will be up, that would guarantee my previous argument.
Right.
So the thing is that we're basically just giving a stronger, a general principle that then fits this specific situation. So the conditional, if it's 1:45, the sun is up, that is new information supplied in the answer choice that, if true, will guarantee the argument when those were just evidence and conclusion separately.
Okay.
That's it. It's like stupidly simple, but because it's stupidly simple, it's a little bit counterintuitive that it would be the answer.
Yeah. I read that very thing last night in one of your documents.
Nice.
Yeah. Is there danger in creating a conditional where there is no conditional?
Well, if we're talking about a sufficient assumption answer choice.
Sure.
Well, yeah, sufficient assumptions, that's totally fine, because sufficient assumption questions open the door to new information. So what I would often do for these questions, especially the earlier one category with the lots of conditionals, I would actually prephrase or predict the answer. I would almost mathematically come up with my own conditional statement based on what they've given me, and then as a prediction, and then look for that prediction in the answer choices. So in that sense, I am creating a conditional where there previously was not one.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. All right, that's good. Parallel reasoning, I haven't worked on it in depth this week, but my impression as I have struggled through it is that every single word matters. Every single tense matters. Is it future tense, past tense? Every single indicator of certainty matters. Every single detail matters. Is it a positive statement or a negative statement? Is that a fair assessment of parallel reasoning?
Yeah, every word does matter for sure. I would think about the keys primarily, past tense, present, future, that all matters for sure. I would think more about degrees of certainty. So always, never, sometimes, probably, maybe, majority, never. All of those degrees of certainty matter a lot. And those are actually, in my view, the easiest to look for.
Sure. Okay.
And then a more difficult one to look for that's probably more important because it's more difficult to look for. Again, they reward us related to how difficult something is, right? So the other thing to look for is the categories of things they're discussing. So some people, all people, the majority of people. Again, it's related to degrees of certainty, of course, but it's more likely to appear at the beginning of the sentence rather than the end. And it's also going to be more of a modifier of, let's say, a pronoun like people.
Okay, versus the end of the sentence. Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Good. Let's see, I had one more question about that. Oh, what question is it? What prep test and what question is it where they say all of the meals are prepared in this private kitchen by these cooks? And then all the answer choices are the same, except they change one or two words, or change the phrase order or something. Do you know that?
That one, I don't know that one off the top of my head. I don't know if you've tried Googling it, but sometimes Google, if you can remember a unique keyword, that'll help you in Google.
Yeah.
But there are a good number of parallel questions like that, and these are the hardest, where all 5 choices are virtually identical, except for those little keywords, like, again, degrees of certainty, categories of things they're discussing, that make all the difference. So if you look at, again, I have categorizations of these LR questions. If you email me, I'll send it to you if you don't already have it. And then if you just look through the prep tests for parallel questions that appear later in the section, every other prep test, you'll find a question like this that is going to be a level 5 or hardest question.
Okay.
There are a lot like that.
Okay.
If you want another one like that, I think Southgate mattress. There's a question on Southgate mattress that's kind of like this. There's one about tanzanite stones in the 30s. That's also all 5 choices, very similar.
Okay, that sounds good. Sure, I will look those up. I imagine you have those lists on your just in the courses. Is that right?
Yeah, they're in the courses, but if you can't find it, just email me. They're usually linked below a given workshop, but if you email me, I could just have my team send you the direct link.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anyway, okay, let's see if I have anything else I need to ask. I don't think so. My weakness in logic games was like mixed grouping games, but I think I've got it. So I'm good.
Okay. Well, it was great to finally meet you, Jill. If anything else comes up, please feel free to reach out. And I'm excited to have you in the course and be in touch with you going forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.